I asked you while they were speaking, are you surprised by this? Are you?
Yeah, I certainly am. I mean, I think that it was in Kim Jong-un's interest to try to keep the temperature as low as possible, because that way he could actually develop his missiles and his nukes, because you don't need to test all the time. He would be able to do that, keep the temperature low, the United States not paying any attention to him or paying little attention. And that would have meant in about a year's time, maybe even 9 months, he would have a fully developed capability. But he didn't do that, and now we've really forced to deal with this before he is able, I think, to put a nuke on a missile and to launch it at the United States.
You say the U.S. is forced to deal with this. What does that mean? What are we forced to do in your mind?
Well, I think that essentially, Secretary Tillerson, President Trump on the 22nd of last month, they were talking about how there was a pathway to peace and how the North Koreans were starting to respect us. Well, clearly we've been disrespected, and now, we have seen all sorts of missile tests, one over Japan last Tuesday.
Yep.
This is really serious for our allies and friends, and it challenges the credibility of the United States.
Very much so. This graphic behind us is a visual depiction of the 6 tests that they've conducted. You look at the first being a kiloton over a decade ago to last night's 120 kilotons, 10 times larger than the bomb they tested just a year ago.
Right, and that could do a lot of damage. This is psychological, of course, because the North Koreans are making very fast progress. One of the things that we need to be asking, and not only with nukes but also with missiles, they have to be getting help. The least likely explanation is that they're doing this on their own. We need to know who has been giving them the technical assistance, plus also the materials, as well as the diplomatic, economic, and money laundering support that's necessary to be able to do 120 kilotons.
Oh, it's a great point. We've got another map we're going to put up on the screen of North Korea and their testing sites. Obviously, of who may be helping them. Well, one of the countries that borders them is massive, with a great deal of technology, believed to be their client state in China. How responsible is China for this test, and will this finally, in any way, force them to put the screws to this regime?
The Chinese will be only forced to put the screws to the regime when we put the screws to China. China has been supplying semi-processed fissile material for the nuclear weapons program and some minor components and equipment. But for the ballistic missile program, China's help has been substantial.
Why has China been helping them?
Well, because every time North Korea does something provocative, we run to China and ask for their cooperation. We plead with them. We send a Secretary of State or some other high envoy. And that way, the Chinese are able to divert us from our talking about things that matter to us, like South China Sea, predatory trade practices, cyber attacks. We don't discuss those when we're talking about and obsessed with North Korea. So Beijing finds that, at least on a short term, this is very, very advantageous for them.
So do you think Beijing wants Kim Jong-un's regime to continue to pursue this, to be that sort of satellite agitator that prevents our ability to influence that region? Because once they've got that nuclear capability, there's almost a permanent blackmail over what the U.S. can do.
Well, certainly. And I think the Chinese, they have sort of an ambivalent attitude. But, where it counts, at the top of the political system, with the Chinese military and with Xi Jinping, the ruler, I think that they find that this is good for them. Now, a lot of people, like in the foreign ministry and certainly in the policymaking community, they think that this is really bad for China in the long run. And they certainly are right, because China gets hurt more by North Korea if you think a decade, 2 decades down the road. But when it counts in, the next month or two, this is really good for the Chinese, as I mentioned.
Okay, if it's good for the Chinese, it's probably not good for us at this point. So if you've got an America First view of this, and you say, we're living under a potential blackmail scenario, sanctions haven't worked, UN resolutions haven't worked, maybe they're not strong enough sanctions at this point.
Certainly not strong enough.
We see these facilities here. Is there a point at which a preemptive strike or a shooting down of missiles is the next step for the U.S.?
No, I think the next step is a non-kinetic one. We need to go to the Security Council and ask for a complete embargo. And if the Chinese and the Russians delay, what we need to do is put severe costs on Moscow and Beijing. And we can certainly do that because the largest Chinese banks, like Bank of China, which was named in a 2016 UN report, they've been money laundering for the North Koreans. And President Trump, by designating them a primary money laundering concern, can effectively put a death sentence on the largest Chinese institutions. That would throw the Chinese financial system into turmoil, rock the economy, and maybe even bring down the Communist Party. So we have the tools to do this. We just don't have the political will, Pete.
Well, you say we, the collective, we do believe that this Trump administration has the political will at this moment, in light of the fact that they've seen now China clearly turn their back on what our interests are.
I don't know what the Trump administration will do, but we do know that at the end of June, they did give a death sentence to a small fry Chinese bank as a signal to Beijing, and I suspect that the administration is willing to go after the bigger banks. I hope that they do that because, you know, this war talk is premature. There are a lot of things that we can do to China, to Russia, to North Korea that we haven't yet tried. And because of, you know, the war is just so horrific, we have a moral obligation to do these things short of the use of force, because I think we can actually disarm North Korea. We have overwhelming leverage over these countries. They have overwhelming leverage over North Korea. We should use our leverage.
You say the word disarm. We've got a graphic here from Google Maps, I believe, of this is at or near the facility where it was tested last night. What are we looking at, and what is a facility like this utilizing?
Yeah, this is in the mountains in the northeastern part of North Korea, Punggye-ri. What you're looking at some of those are barracks and things. What you can't really see are the entrances to the tunnels where they bury these devices. And this device was buried probably in the early part of March of this year, and they just tunneled it. They sealed the tunnel, and they just left it there. And it really was, they set this thing off when they felt it was politically expedient to do so. All they needed was that Kim Jong-un, the ruler of North Korea, to make a political decision that it was a good time to do it. And I think that what he saw was the United States at a point where it might not be focused on the North Koreans. And so they figured this was the time to get away with something. And they probably also thought that with the Chinese in the run-up to the 19th Party Congress.
So the end goal is a North Korea that ultimately doesn't have nuclear weapons and can't use them to blackmail us.
Right.
You're saying that there still are tools at our disposal vis-a-vis China, because China is so important there,
Absolutely.
that can get them to denuclearize, not just freeze, but pull back from that?
Yeah, China supplies a lot of stuff. So, for instance, like almost 45% of the food, almost 100% of the oil, much of it on concessionary terms. China accounts for more than 90% of their two-way trade. But the most important thing that China provides is confidence to regime members that they are safe from the United States, safe from South Korea and the international community. If China were to signal that they no longer supported the nuclear weapons program, I think that you would find a lot of senior officials in Pyongyang distancing themselves from Kim Jong-un.
Man, that's going to take some pretty tough brass tack stuff from us to get them there.
We have a president, though, who is willing to break precedent, so I think that, you know, there's a possibility that if he decides he wants to do it, if he wants to go down in the history as the person who actually disarmed North Korea, he's got the tools.
Well, Gordon Chang, thank you very much for your expertise on this.